Hello everyone, welcome to YouTube channel Thumbs Up. In this video, we will be discussing the first section on the coordination lesson, and it is mostly based on the human nervous system. So I hope you all enjoy the video.
Our lesson, the first part of coordination. Here, firstly, we have to learn about the processes and systems which are involved in coordination. Coordination between stimuli and response is needed to maintain constant internal environment inside the body of an organism for their existence. Animals have two different but related systems for coordination. They are the nervous system and the endocrine system. Then we have to learn the similarities and differences of the nervous system and endocrine system, and we have to compare the two systems. In nervous coordination, the transmission occurs through neurons, while in hormonal coordination, the transmission occurs through blood. And in nervous coordination, there are chemical and electrical transmitters, and in hormonal coordination, there are chemical transmitters because the hormones are chemicals. In nervous coordination, there are localized responses, and in hormonal coordination, there are diffuse response. The time taken to start the response, nervous coordination is fast acting, while hormonal coordination is slower in action. The duration of response is short in nervous coordination, and in hormonal coordination, the duration of response is long when compared with the nervous coordination. And this is a diagrammatic comparison between the nervous coordination and hormonal coordination. And now we have to learn about the organization of nervous systems in different animal phyla. Animals have specialized systems of neurons to sense their surroundings and respond rapidly. In the animal kingdom, Cnidarians are the simplest animals having a nervous system. They have a diffuse nerve net which is composed of interconnected individual neurons, and the best example is Hydra. And in more complex animals, the nervous systems contain groups of neurons organized into nerves and often ganglia and a brain. In some platyhelminthes such as Planaria, the nervous system contains a pair of ganglia in the anterior region of the brain and a pair of ventral nerve cords that runs longitudinally. In Planarians, their eye spots, which are located near the ganglia, act as photoreceptors. Annelids and arthropods have somewhat complicated brains and ventral nerve cords. The ventral nerve cord contains ganglia. They are segmentally arranged. Example for Annelida is the leech, and example for arthropoda is the cockroach. The nervous system of Echinodermata is comprised of radial nerves and a nerve ring. Example is the seal's tongue. And the nervous system of Chordata consists of central nervous system and a peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system is composed of the brain and the spinal cord, while the peripheral nervous system is composed of nerves and ganglia, and the example is gecko. So here you can see Hydra, which is a Cnidarian, and there you can see nerve net which is composed of individual interconnected neurons, and here you can see a sea star, and there in the center you can see the nerve ring and also the radial nerve, and then here you can see a Planaria which belongs to the phylum Echinodermata. There are two nerve cords, and their anterior region is enlarged to form the brain, and also they have eye spots which act as photoreceptors, and transverse nerves are also there. And here you will see the leech. It belongs to phylum Annelida. There's the brain, ventral nerve cord, and the segmental ganglia. And here you can see the insect which belong to phylum Arthropoda. It consists of brain, ventral nerve cord, and segmented ganglia. And here gecko depicting phylum Chordata. There you can see the brain, sensory ganglia, and the spinal cord or the dorsal nerve cord. Now let's learn about the gross structure and functions of human nervous system. Human nervous system consists of central and peripheral nervous systems. In vertebrates, the brain and the spinal cord form the central nervous system. Nerves and ganglia forms the main components of the peripheral nervous system. So here you can see the two main parts of the human nervous system. Central nervous system, which is made up of brain and the spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, which is made up of cranial nerves. Cranial nerves are the nerves which arise from the brain, and also spinal nerves. They are the nerves which arise from the spinal cord, and also the ganglia, which are located outside the central nervous system. And now let's learn about the central nervous system. Central nervous system consists of brain and the spinal cord. In the vertebrates, central nervous system develops from the hollow dorsal nerve cord during embryonic development. Anterior part of the central nervous system enlarges and forms brain, which consists of three major regions: forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. The central canal in the brain forms four irregular shaped cavities called ventricles. There are four cerebral ventricles, and out of them, three are present in the forebrain and the other one is present in the hindbrain. The central canal is continuous in the spinal cord. The ventricles and central canal contain cerebrospinal fluid, and this fluid helps to maintain uniform pressure within the central nervous system and also act as a shock absorbent. And also it helps to circulate nutrients, hormones, and also it helps to remove the waste products. So here you can see the cerebrospinal fluid. It is colored in blue color, and in this area there are these are the three cerebroventricles which are located in the forebrain, and this ventricle is the one which is located in the hindbrain, and this is the central canal of the spinal cord. All of these are filled with cerebrospinal fluid. The brain and the spinal cord have several adaptations to be protected from physical injuries. The brain is protected by bony skull, and the spinal cord is surrounded by vertebra, which forms the vertebral column. Further protection to central nervous system is given by three layers of tissues called meninges. So out of them, the outermost layer is dura mater and innermost layer is pia mater, and in between there is arachnoid mater. So outermost dura mater, innermost pia mater, and in between there is arachnoid mater. The infection of these meninges causes meningitis. Now let's learn about the main parts of the human brain. The forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain of human embryo develops into the adult brain. The forebrain gives rise to cerebrum, thalamus, hypothalamus, and pineal body. Actually, the pineal body is a small gland which is located on the roof of third cerebroventricle. Then the midbrain gives to part of the brain stem. Hindbrain gives rise to cerebellum, pons varoli, and medulla oblongata. The brain stem consists of the midbrain, pons varoli, and medulla oblongata. So this is a midline view of the brain. It shows the pituitary gland, which is colored in red color, and midbrain, pons varoli, and medulla oblongata, which forms the brain's stem, and then the cerebellum, and also the pineal gland, which is located on the roof of the third cerebroventricle, and also the thalamus, and then hypothalamus, and the corpus callosum, which forms a bridge between the two cerebral hemispheres. And then the major part of this brain is the largest part of the brain is the cerebrum. Cerebrum is the largest part of the human brain. It is divided by a deep cleft into left and right cerebral hemispheres. The superficial part of the cerebrum is composed of nerve cell bodies or grey matter, forming the cerebral cortex, and deeper layers consist of nerve fibers or white matter. The two cerebral hemispheres are connected by corpus callosum, which is a mass of white matter. The cerebral cortex shows many infoldings to increase the surface area of the cerebrum. The cortex of each cerebral hemisphere is divided into 4 lobes, which are known as frontal lobe, parietal lobe, temporal lobe, and the occipital lobe. So here you can see the frontal lobe, parietal lobe, temporal lobe, and the occipital lobe. Then we have to learn about the functional areas of the cerebrum. There are 3 major functional areas of the cerebrum. They are sensory areas, association areas, and motor areas. Sensory areas are responsible for receiving and processing sensory information, including perception of pain, temperature, touch, sight, hearing, taste, and smell. Association areas are responsible for recognition and interpretation of sensory information, and integration and processing of complex mental functions such as memory, intelligence, reasoning, judgment, and emotions. Motor areas are responsible for directing skeletal muscle movement. Skeletal means voluntary muscles through initiation and control of voluntary muscle contraction. So here you can clearly see the different functional areas of the brain are colored in various colors. Thalamus is situated within the cerebral hemispheres, just below the corpus callosum. It consists of 2 masses comprising of grey matter and white matter. So here the white matter is not included in the note, but you should include it in your note. It consists of 2 masses of grey matter and white matter. Functions of thalamus include: it acts as the main input center of sensory information from special sense organs and sensory receptors in the skin and integral organs. The sensory information is sorted and directed to specific location of the cerebral cortex for further processing and perception. The thalamus relays and redistributes the nerve impulses from most part of the brain to the cerebral cortex. And in this diagram, the thalamus is highlighted in green color. Hypothalamus is situated below and in front of the thalamus, immediately above the pituitary gland. It is linked to the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland by nerve fibers and to the anterior lobe by a complex system of blood vessels. Its functions include regulation of body temperature, regulation of thirst and water balance, regulation of appetite, and regulation of sleep and wake cycles. Also, hypothalamus controls autonomic nervous system, and also it initiates fight or flight response. And hypothalamus is the source for posterior pituitary hormones, releasing hormones that can act on anterior pituitary gland. And also hypothalamus plays a role in sexual behaviors. Here in this diagram, hypothalamus is highlighted in yellow color and thalamus is highlighted in red color. Midbrain. Midbrain is the upper part of the brainstem. It is situated between the cerebrum above and the pons varolii below, surrounding the cerebrospinal fluid connection of the third and fourth ventricles. The midbrain contains aggregates of nerve cell bodies and nerve tracts which connect the cerebrum with lower brain and spinal cord. The functions of the midbrain include: it acts as a relay station for ascending and descending nerve fibers, and also it receives and integrates sensory information, auditory and visual information, and send it to particular regions of the forebrain and coordinates auditory and visual reflexes. So here in the middle you can see the midbrain, which mostly acts as a relay station. Pons varolii. Pons varolii is located in front of cerebellum, below the midbrain and above the medulla oblongata. It contains nerve fibers which forms a bridge between two cerebellum hemispheres, and also it contains nerve fibers passing between the higher levels of the brain and spinal cord. Groups of nerve cell bodies in the pons varolii form centers that regulate respiration. Some nerve cell bodies in the pons varolii can act as relay stations. Functions of the pons varolii include: it transfers information between the peripheral nervous system and the midbrain and forebrain, and it coordinates large-scale body movements such as climbing and running, and also the pons varolii together with the medulla oblongata helps to regulate respiration. So in this figure, this area shows pons varolii. Medulla oblongata. Medulla oblongata is the lowest part of the brainstem which extends from the pons varolii above and is continuous with the spinal cord below. It consists of cardiovascular center, respiratory center and reflex centers. The functions of the medulla oblongata includes: transfers information between peripheral nervous system, midbrain and the forebrain, and it coordinates various body movements like running and climbing, and it contains several autonomic homeostatic functions like breathing, heart and blood vessel activity. Also, it contains involuntary reflexes such as vomiting, swallowing, coughing and sneezing. So here you can see the medulla oblongata. So now let's learn about cerebellum. Cerebellum is located behind the pons varolii and below the posterior portion of the cerebrum. The cerebellum consists of two hemispheres, and its functions are coordination of voluntary muscular movements, maintains posture and balance, and also it helps in learning and remembering motor skills. So here this section shows cerebellum, and this is a cross section or transverse section of the human brain. According to that, in the transverse section of the human brain, grey matter is located outside and white matter is located inside, and also the cerebroventricles, which are filled with cerebrospinal fluid, are also indicated here. Spinal cord. Spinal cord is an elongated cylindrical structure suspended in the vertebral canal, and it is continuous with the medulla oblongata. The center of the spinal cord contains central canal, which is surrounded by gray matter. Outer region of the spinal cord is made up of white matter. So that is the difference when compared to the brain, because in the spinal cord white matter is located outside and gray matter located inside, but in the brain it is the vice versa. In brain, gray matter located outside and white matter located inside. In spinal cord, this is the central canal. The functions of the spinal cord includes it links the central nervous system to sensory and motor neurons, and also facilitates the nerve impulse propagation towards and away from the brain, and also it coordinates and produces reflexes. So here you can see the spinal cord and the vertebra. Now let's learn about peripheral nervous system. Peripheral nervous system is made up of cranial nerves, spinal nerves, and autonomic nervous system with ganglion. It transmits impulses to and from central nervous system, regulating both an animal's movement and its internal environment. So this figure shows the functional hierarchy of the peripheral nervous system of a vertebrate. According to that, the sensory information from sensory receptors reaches the central nervous system along the peripheral nervous system neurons, referred to as afferent neurons or sensory neurons. Within the central nervous system, the information is processed and instructions are transmitted to effector tissues or organs like muscles and glands and endocrine cells along the peripheral nervous system neurons, which are referred to as efferent neurons or the motor neurons. The peripheral nervous system consists of two efferent components. They are the motor system and the autonomic nervous system. The motor system, it contains neurons that carry nerve impulses to skeletal muscles and controls voluntary activities. And autonomic nervous system generally controls involuntary activities of the body, and it contains neurons which carry impulses to control activities of smooth muscles, cardiac muscles, and glands. This mainly contain autonomic nervous system mainly contain two divisions as sympathetic and parasympathetic. Sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. The majority of the body organs are supplied by both sympathetic and parasympathetic nerves, which have antagonistic or opposite functions. Sympathetic stimulations prepare the body to deal with exciting or stressful situations and energy generating situations such as fight or flight situations, and parasympathetic division causes opposite responses that promote calming or self-maintenance functions such as rest and digest. These two divisions differ in overall functions, organization, and the signal release. And the parasympathetic nerves exceed the central nervous system at the base of the brain or the spinal cord as cranial or spinal nerves, but the sympathetic nerves exit only from spinal cord. Different neurotransmitters enable the two systems to bring about the two opposite effects in different organs, such as lungs, heart, intestine, and the bladder. For example, when the neurotransmitter secreted by the parasympathetic division is acetylcholine, sympathetic division secretes norepinephrine. So here there is a comparison between the action of parasympathetic division on internal organs and the action of sympathetic division on internal organs. The parasympathetic division, it constricts the pupil of eyes, while sympathetic division, it dilates the pupil. In parasympathetic division, it stimulates the salivary gland secretion. In sympathetic division, it inhibits the salivary gland secretion. In parasympathetic division, it constricts the bronchi in lungs, and in sympathetic division, it relaxes the bronchi in lungs. In parasympathetic division, it slows the heart, and while in sympathetic division, it accelerates the heart. So the opposite is happen. And in parasympathetic division, it stimulates the activity of stomach and intestines, and in sympathetic division, it inhibits the activity of stomach and intestine. In parasympathetic division, it stimulates the activity of pancreas, and in sympathetic division, it inhibits the activity of pancreas. In parasympathetic division, it stimulates the gallbladder, and in sympathetic division, it stimulates the glucose release from the liver and inhibits the gallbladder. Also, it stimulates the adrenal medulla. Parasympathetic division promotes the emptying of bladder, and the sympathetic division inhibits the emptying of bladder. The parasympathetic division promotes erection of genitalia, while the sympathetic division promotes ejaculation and vaginal contractions. So that's a comparison between parasympathetic and sympathetic division, how they act on our internal organs. So now let's learn about the generation and transmission of nerve impulse. In all cells, including neurons, ions are distributed unequally between the cell interior and exterior or extracellular fluid. Generally, the inside of the cell is negatively charged, whereas the exterior is positively charged. These opposite charges are attracted across the plasma membrane, and as a result, it creates a voltage difference across the membrane called as membrane potential. Resting potential is the membrane potential when a neuron is at rest. Typically, it varies with a value between minus 60 millivolts to minus 80 millivolts. Generally, we consider it as minus 70 millivolts. The resting membrane potential is maintained by three major factors. They are the distribution of ion concentration inside and outside of the neuron, and selective permeability of plasma membrane to potassium and sodium ions, and also the sodium-potassium pump. In the distribution of ion concentration inside and outside of the neuron, in a non-conducting neuron, the potassium concentration is higher inside the cell, while sodium concentration is higher outside the cell. In addition, chlorine and other large anions such as proteins are present inside the cell. So as a result, a neuron has a more negative charge inside and a positive charge outside of the cell. Selective permeability of plasma membrane to potassium and sodium ions. Here the sodium and potassium channels, which are the membrane-bound proteins that are able to open or close in response to stimuli, they are present, and the potassium channels allows only potassium ions, and sodium channels allows only sodium ions to diffuse according to their concentration gradient. There are more potassium channels than sodium channels, therefore there is a negative charge outside of the cell. Sodium-potassium pump, it helps to maintain sodium and potassium gradient across the cell membrane by transporting 3 sodium ions out of the cell for every 2 potassium ions that goes in. This uses ATP to actively transport these ions. So now let's learn about action potential, it occurs due to a change in membrane potential above a threshold value due to a stimulus. This has three main steps such as depolarization, repolarization, and hyperpolarization. In the depolarization, a change in the cell membrane potential such that the inside of the membrane is made less negative relative to the outside. Depolarization results due to sodium ion inflow in response to a stimulus. Repolarization, here the sodium channels close, blocking the sodium ion inflow. However, most potassium channels are open, permitting the potassium outflow. Therefore, this makes the inside of the cell negative. Hyperpolarization, here the sodium channels are closed, but potassium channels are open. As a result, the inside of the membrane is made more negative. So here you can see how an action potential is generated. Refractory period. Refractory period is the short time immediately after an action potential in which the neuron cannot respond to another stimulus owing to the inactivation of sodium channels. This prevents the reverse conduction of an impulse in an axon. So this graph shows the resting potential value and then the depolarization, and then an action potential is generated, and then gradually it hyperpolarizes and repolarizes and hyperpolarizes, and then again come back to the resting membrane potential value. Generally, we take the resting membrane potential value as minus 70 millivolts and action potential as plus 40 millivolts. Conduction of action potential or the nerve impulse. Nerve impulse is a series of action potentials that move along an axon. An action potential is generated due to sodium ion inflow or depolarization at one location in the axon. This axon potential spreads to the neighboring location while the initial location repolarizes. This depolarization and repolarization process is repeated through the axon. The speed of the conduction depends on the diameter of the axon. The higher the diameter of the axon, the higher the speed of conduction. Therefore, the speed increases with the diameter. Presence of myelinated axon. When the axon is myelinated, the action potential jumps from one node of Ranvier to the next one. Therefore, the speed of conduction increases. So here you can see the myelin sheath, and in between them there are the nodes of Ranvier. So the nerve impulse is passed through saltatory conduction, where we call it jumps from one node of Ranvier to the next node of Ranvier. So this is the process which you learned above, conduction of nerve impulse. And synapses. Synapse is a junction where a presynaptic cell communicates with another cell which is called as postsynaptic cell across a narrow gap called the synaptic cleft. Postsynaptic cells are the neurons, muscle cells, and secretory cells. This junction where one neuron communicates with the next cell using a chemical or neurotransmitter is called a chemical synapse. And some neurons can also communicate through direct electrical connections. They are the electrical synapses. So this figure shows a synapse which communicates through a neurotransmitter. So this is the structure of the synapse. There is the presynaptic axon and also the microtubules, lots of mitochondria, neurofilaments and synaptic vesicles which contain neurotransmitters. Here the neurotransmitters are depicted in blue color dots, and there is the synaptic cleft, and also there is postsynaptic membrane, and also the dendrites, and etc. So now let's learn about the transmission of nerve impulse, the mechanism of transmission of nerve impulse through chemical synapses. Actually, an action potential is generated at axon terminal, depolarizes the plasma membrane of presynaptic cell. Then, the depolarization at the presynaptic terminal causes calcium ions to diffuse into the terminals. Then, rising calcium ions causes the binding of synaptic vesicles containing neurotransmitters through presynaptic membrane. This results in release of neurotransmitters into the presynaptic cell, and then neurotransmitters diffuse across the synaptic cleft. Then neurotransmitters bind and activate specific receptors in postsynaptic cell membrane. So here you can see an action potential is generated at axon terminal, and it depolarizes the plasma membrane of presynaptic cell. Then depolarization at the presynaptic terminal causes calcium ions to diffuse into the terminals, and then the rising calcium ions causes the binding of synaptic vesicles. So here you can see the synaptic vesicles are binded containing neurotransmitters in the presynaptic membrane. Then this results in release of neurotransmitters into the synaptic cleft. So here you can see the neurotransmitters are released into the synaptic cleft, and then they bind and activate specific receptors. These are the receptors which are present on the postsynaptic cell membrane. If acetylcholine is taken for an example, the binding of neurotransmitters to postsynaptic membrane allows sodium and potassium ions to diffuse across the postsynaptic membrane. Then depolarization takes place in the postsynaptic membrane and reaches the action potential. Then after passing nerve impulse to postsynaptic cell, the signal is transmitted either by enzymatic hydrolysis of neurotransmitters or the recapture of neurotransmitter into presynaptic terminals. Now let's learn about neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are the molecules that are released from the synaptic terminals of presynaptic neuron, and they diffuse across the synaptic cleft and bind to the receptors at postsynaptic membrane, triggering a response. So here you can see the activity of neurotransmitters. They are released from the synaptic terminals of the presynaptic neuron, and they diffuse across the synaptic cleft, and they bind to the receptors which are present at postsynaptic membrane, triggering a response. Some common neurotransmitters are acetylcholine, some amino acids, biogenic amines, and neuropeptides, and also some gases. So here you can see some common neurotransmitters: adrenaline, noradrenaline, acetylcholine, etc. Reflex arc. Reflex arc is the functional unit of vertebrate nervous system. It typically contains 3 neurons. They are afferent or sensory neuron, interneuron, and efferent or motor neuron. Here, in a simplest reflex arc, a sensory neuron transmits impulses from sensory receptors to the central nervous system, where it synapses with an associated neuron called the interneuron, and this impulse is transmitted to a motor neuron. The motor neuron conveys the signal to effector organs or tissues. So finally, we have to learn about some common disorders of the human nervous system. First one is schizophrenia. It is a severe mental disturbance which is characterized by psychotic episodes in which patients have distorted perception of reality. They experience voices that only they can hear. They think that others are plotting to harm them. Evidence suggests that these patients, this disorder affects neural pathways that use dopamine as a neurotransmitter. And the second one is depression. Depression is likely due to complex combination of factors that include changes in neurotransmitter levels in the brain, genetic, psychological, social and environmental factors. People who are suffering from depression show depressed mood, abnormalities in sleep and appetite, and also the energy level. In some conditions, one's enjoyable activities are no longer pleasurable or interesting. Some conditions involve extreme mood swings. Actually, effective therapies are available to increase the activity of some neurotransmitters in the brain. The next one is Alzheimer's disease. It is a severe mental deterioration which is called dementia, characterized by confusion and memory loss. Here the patients are gradually becoming less able to dress, bathe and feed themselves. They lose their ability to recognize people, including their immediate family members. The cause of the disease is due to progressive and irreversible degeneration of neurons in the brain, especially in the cerebral cortex, with deteriorating mental function. This disease affects elderly people. Genetic factors may be involved. So far, there is no cure for this Alzheimer's disease. So here you can see a comparison between a healthy brain and brain affected with severe Alzheimer's disease. There you can clearly see how the irreversible degeneration of neurons and nervous tissue has been occurred. Parkinson's disease. Parkinson's disease is a progressive motor disorder that leads to lack of control and coordination of muscle movements. The patient shows slowness of movements, difficulty in initiating movements, poor balance, fixed muscle tone causing lack of facial expressions, speech problems and muscle tremor. This disease is associated with gradual degeneration of dopamine releasing neurons in the brain. It is most commonly in elderly people and genetic factors may also be involved. The Parkinson's disease can be treated but not cured. So this diagram shows an elderly person which is affected with Parkinson's disease, and the most of the symptoms we discussed earlier can be seen in this figure.
And with that, today's lesson will come to an end, and we will be covering the remaining sections under this lesson as well as the remaining lessons too in our future videos. So I suggest you to keep watching our channel, and I wish you all the very best for your A-level examination.